How are you guys doing today? Anybody do anything fun or exciting over the week? Or it's so boring, it just you've got to tell somebody because you can't hold it in? I just finished up a class a little while ago, and if I show videos in the class online, most of the time they're just fine because they're all from sites that are supposed to allow you to do that. But every once in a while, YouTube will flag something that's really odd. So if there's a part that I'm talking about and then suddenly you can't see it when you're watching this as a recording, just I will reference the videos that I'm looking at, and they're always in the lesson. The links are always there. From the class I just finished up, the thing that YouTube flagged was an open source 57 seconds of music that they won't, and they cut that out of the YouTube video. So who knows? Okay. So this week we are talking about the birth of the floral industry, believe it or not. Mehmet II, he's the guy who took over essentially the Western Roman Empire and changed the state religion from, not really, but the religion of the rulers from Christianity to Islam. And we're talking right about mid to end of the Renaissance in Europe is this time period that we're looking at. But the reason I say the birth of the floral industry, the Ottoman court, one of the things that made Western Rome last for so long was because Constantine, when he moved there to Turkey, he right away realized that it was going to be a lot smarter thing to work with the different cultures around them rather than to tell everybody that his culture and the people that look like him were the best, the brightest, and the smartest. And it's interesting that he was doing that for the Eastern Roman Empire. At the same time, the Western Roman Empire was falling apart because they wanted everybody to look the same way, and they were making it a lot more difficult for people that didn't have the right kinds of families or right kind of looks to become citizens. And so while Constantine's Rome was growing, the Roman Italy was falling apart. I just think that that's really interesting. And then with Islam growing in power in this part of the world, that's when Mehmet II starts taking over things. Now, before we get into that too much, what I did want to do is I wanted to look really briefly with the projects that have been turned in. And is anybody here right now? Did have any of you already submitted a project to the discussion board? Okay, let's see. Ryan, would you mind? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but would you mind taking just a minute and talking about your project?
Absolutely. So I wanted to try and use a camera lucida, which is a prismatic device that allows you to see through something to kind of project an image on it below. And some, not only artists, but like surveyors in the in old America used these devices, and I was able to get my hands on one, and I actually have it right here. And
that's cool.
Yeah, so I thought it would be cool to try to go to like a historic place to see what kind of arts and crafts they were doing around here, and if there was anything that indicated they may have been using a camera lucida or a similar kind of optical device. I didn't find information about if they were using a camera lucida, but over the Jacob Hamblin home, they had some of the quiltings they did, ink lettering, things like that. It was kind of neat, a little propagandistic, kind of cool though. Anyway, when I got out there, I tried using my camera lucida to draw the Jacob Hamblin home, and found out that it was a lot harder to use outside than inside. So that was kind of a failure. So I tried to draw a piece inside the house, but I just have the device. I don't really have the stability platform, and so my little drawing that I used for it, I feel like was kind of subpar. But it was a really fun device to use, and if any other student ever wanted to check it out, I'd happily meet on campus and let them borrow it. So
That's very cool. That's when Talbot wrote his The Pencil of Nature, where he talked about photography. And this is mid 19th century, guys. He was the first one to actually propose ideas like photography could be used ultimately for X-rays and recording electrons. And that was a long time before anybody thought about that. But at about that time, mid 19th century, the camera lucida, somebody actually started developing one that was cheap enough that they could market it, and it became marketed in magazines as a tool that anybody could use to become an artist. And what it is essentially is something that it's like a reverse overhead projector, where you take an image is extracted from what's in front of you and then put on paper down below, and then you stay out of the way of the lines, but you just trace the lines of the image. Really interesting thing. There's also the camera obscura, where you do the same thing with a box, and then there's another one, and there's actually a couple of them in Utah that Pioneer set up, and then also in California, where it's the camera obscura is actually projects into a little room that you can go inside, and then you can see the surrounding area, which I just think stuff like that is fascinating. Very cool project, Ryan. Anybody else? Anybody else here whose project is on the discussion? One thing that's really neat to me is that everybody did something different. And there's a lot, like here's a report on Renaissance patrons. And so you see several videos, you see PowerPoints, you see a lot of different kinds of things. And I love that, because it tells me that first off, nobody's cheating, but also it says that each of you are kind of expressing the things that are interesting to you. And I think that's fantastic. All right, great. Okay, switching back to our regularly programmed scheduled program. Again, Ryan, thank you for sharing that. What we are going to be talking about is the Ottomans in Turkey. And the reason why this is valid is, does anybody remember about the time period of the Renaissance?
Was it about, sorry, go ahead.
1500s? Sorry.
Yeah, 1350, 1550. That's the time period we're looking at. And then we jumped over to India, and the time period we're looking at there was about, huge overlap, 1400 to 1600, something like that. And now we're looking at Turkey, with the Ottoman Empire. And again, this is the end of the Western Roman Empire. and it's most of the government is still there, but the Ottomans just take over. And the Ottomans, it was a dynasty founded by Othman, and the people living there kind of corrupted his or mispronounced his name and changed it into Ottoman. But these guys were all, it was directed by Muslims, but they kept almost all of the public plans in place the way things were. And just, I'm not going to say that. They didn't keep everything in place, and they kept a lot of the networks in place. And so it was a relatively smooth transition. Of course, discounting for the fact that the Ottomans attacked a lot of cities, took over a lot of people, executed a whole bunch of folks. If you push all that aside, it was relatively a smooth transition. So I guess for the time period, and the way the world was at that time, it was relatively smooth transition. But by the I don't know, just a couple of years into Mehmet II's reign, things had stabilized to the point where the culture continued and art developed, art flourished. A lot of the times when a particular religion is identified with being with the ruling family, you think that they would force everybody to follow that, kind of like what Isabel and Ferdinand did, where you have the expulsion of the Jews, you have the expulsion of the Muslims, everybody has to be Christian. And then they went, when they took over Spain like that, they decided to find new places to conquer, and that's when they pushed themselves into the Americas, so that everybody there could think like them too. What is different about some of the cultures that we've been seeing? Particularly what was going on in India, for example. What is different from that model that the Mughals were doing?
They seem to be way more tolerant.
Yeah, I think that they realize that you make a lot more money in peacetime, or a lot more people can make money in peacetime than they can in war. And that's when you have the famous salons where the Mughals were hosting people from all around the world just to talk about religion with each other, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And you see a lot of cross-pollination. This guy is remarkable for a number of reasons. And one of them is that as soon as he got into power, he started finding ways to connect different folks. One of the things that is so astonishing to me about the Ottomans is, like we were talking earlier, in Islam, it is inappropriate to have, it's completely inappropriate to have idols for anything, but it is inappropriate to have human depictions that are supposed to be stand-ins for God. You don't have icons. But as Christianity was developing throughout the Roman Empire, it very quickly became a necessity for the process of religion for Eastern Orthodox faith to have icons. This is where we get the idea of iconography being developed, and I think we talked about that a little bit. One of the reasons for iconography being essential in Eastern Christianity was because you have a wide range of skill levels for artists. So there needed to be something done so that everybody could identify the saint or the image, who the image was of. And this is where you get ideas of attributes. Like if you see a woman with a baby on her lap, who's that going to be all the time?
Mary.
Yeah, Madonna and Child. Even though that imagery comes out of Egypt and is thousands of years old, I think it first really starts showing up with Isis and Hathor, but it is those kinds of ideas really helped people communicate through their art. And so you get, and this is prevalent among Christians in Turkey at the time that Mehmet steps into power, and he's Muslim. So you think the Ottomans would outlaw icons. And there were emperors that outlawed icons. But it is interesting that one of the largest and oldest mosques in the Muslim world is the building that Mehmet conquered when he rode into Constantinople, which then became Istanbul. When he rode into the Hagia Sophia, and that was the building that was commissioned under Constantine. It was the largest structure in the world at the time, as far as anybody knows. So big that people have witnessed clouds forming in the ceiling. And this is what people came back from the Crusades. This is one of the reasons why they wanted to build bigger and better churches in Europe, because these engineers coming back from the Crusades had already seen an impossibly big building, and they knew that it could be done. And so I think that's one of the things that inspired the Gothic architecture. But when Mehmet strode into the Hagia Sophia, he looked at it and he told his men, "You will not hurt this structure because it is a house of God." And then it became a holy building for Muslims as well. And it is one of the very few examples where there are icons that are still present. In a functioning mosque, there are images of human beings that are still present. The icons that were saved are of Mary and her baby Jesus, and her husband, Jesus' adopted dad, Joseph. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. One of the very few other buildings in the Muslim world that house human images is in the Kaaba in Mecca, and the image there, that the only image that the Prophet Muhammad allowed to remain, was an image of Mary holding the baby Jesus, which I think is very interesting. And most people do not realize that Jesus is huge for Muslims. The most perfect man that ever lived, the most obedient, and the power that runs the universe, because every particle functions as a process of obedience to the Creator. That's called the Spirit of Christ in Islam. Anyways, so we all that is leading up to the point that, so for Muslims, you don't have icons, but for Eastern Christians, you have to. And what Mehmet II started doing is paying for Christian artists to travel to Italy, for example, learn how to be better painters so they could come back and start painting better icons for the Christian churches. And on the surface, you're thinking that, yeah, big deal. But what is so amazing about this, and it shows real evidence of this cross-pollination and this willingness to get along, is that Mehmet II was financially supporting something that was against his own faith, but he was supporting it because he recognized that somebody who believed differently than him needed it for their faith. So today, big deal. But think about that at that time. You still have people like Vlad in Eastern Europe, who absolutely hated the Turks, was impaling people and allowing them to spend 2 days to die because they believed differently than him. And Mehmet II was paying for people who believed very different than him to learn how to do what they did even better. Isn't that interesting? And the reason why that ties into the modern floral industry is because the court of Istanbul very quickly produced this idea of a veneer of modesty. So unaccompanied women could not have anything to do with unaccompanied men. You always had to be followed with your retinue. And so Turkish women developed, as virtuous Muslim women, they would develop something called floriography, or the language of flowers, where they would send bouquets to give messages to each other and to the men that they admired. And then the man could send his reply back in another bouquet. And what is fascinating to me about all this is, what flower is most associated with Mary today? Well, it's lilies. That's where the fleur-de-lis, as the symbol of royal France, is so important. The fleur-de-lis represents when the Merovingian kings were saved, because lilies showed where a safe passage across the river was, and they connect themselves with Mary. And then, today, what do you send? What color of rose do you send to somebody that you want to be friends with? Anybody know? They're yellow roses or pink roses? Yeah, it's yellow. And what is the color that represents passion? It's a red. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that all comes from Mehmet II and the Muslim court in Turkey. One of the guys, there's a lot of stuff that they did that I think was brutal and horrible, and we aren't looking at a lot of that. One thing that I think was particularly terrible was the Janes, the Janissaries. Janus was a Roman god who had two faces. And the Janissaries, when the Turkish troops the Muslim Turkish troops would come into a new area, like in Eastern Europe, North Africa, all these, different areas like that, one of the things they would do is, every family that had multiple sons, they would take one son. And then that son would be taken back to Turkey and be raised as a Muslim Turk. What this ended up being was, this young man would then function as a hostage for his family and his home culture's good behavior, on one thing, but also that home culture had an in to the ruling houses in Turkey. So they formed a connection there. But what it also meant was that the military was not beholden to a specific general. They're beholden to the ruling family. And it made for a much more stable political structure on all sorts of fronts. And it lasted from the 14th century all the way up to, I think it was 1912, 1919, right around there, when Ataturk disbanded the Ottomans. I think that's really, on one hand, that's really awful, but on the other hand, what this meant, these ideas of stability and connectedness, what they meant was that ideas cross-pollinated. People, like Ryan pointed out, people were tolerant, like with the Mughals. And it wasn't just a tolerance born of, we'll get along because we have to. It was a tolerance that grew out of sharing ideas. One of the greatest janissaries, in my mind, was a young man named oh, and of course, this name just completely left me. Oh yeah, Sinan. Sorry. And he will show up in just a little bit. Right here, Mimar Sinan. Mimar Sinan was one of these Janissary soldiers who retired from the military in his 50s, and had been an army engineer, and he thought, you know what, I'm going to become an architect, and I want to show you the Hagia Sophia. And we're not going to watch this. I want you to watch this video. But the Hagia Sophia, this is the building. Hagia is Hagia, and Sophia is Sophia. But this building was the largest structure in the known world at the time. This thing is gigantic. The Statue of Liberty can stand upright right here. Okay, can you believe this? This was built this was built 1,700 years ago. Let that soak in for just a second. But what does this building remind you of? What kind of architecture does it make you think of? Does it shout Christian to you right away? No, and the reason is, my friend Dr. Safi at Duke, he demonstrates this, but the reason is, when architecture started becoming a big thing in Turkey under the Ottomans, they all looked to the Hagia Sophia, and this became the model for Muslim architecture throughout the world. So it looks like it doesn't look like a mosque? Doesn't it look Muslim to you? And it's actually a Christian structure that was so powerfully influenced the Muslim architects, that's why Muslim architecture looks the way it does. Isn't that interesting? Not something we think of very often. But it was huge, or it is huge. It's still huge. Mimar Sinan thought, you know what? I'm gonna use that and go several times better. And so when Mimar Sinan started, Mimar means architect, and Sinan is his name, so it's architect Sinan. When he started doing his architecture, he used that Byzantine model of the Hagia Sophia, or it means holy wisdom. And he combined it with his knowledge of math and the things that he had learned in his travels as a janissary and as an army engineer. And so he started building these incredible structures, the Blue Mosque, the Soleimani Mosque, all of these beautiful, gorgeous things. And this really set the standard for Turkish architecture and Muslim architecture around the world. And they're beautiful, they're gorgeous. But one of the things that I want you to look at as we look at these, there's a couple things that really kind of stand out. This Sezadi Mosque is a really good example of this. If we go back and look at the Hagia Sophia, we see this dome that has a lot of hints from Roman architecture, and you can still see heavy influences of Roman architecture. This is the first big building Constantine built here after he moved out of Italy. And so we see the spherical dome, the half circle arches everywhere. And in order to brace this, he built these huge piers. These are basically solid stone towers to carry the weight of these arches and the dome. That's why the building is so gigantic. And then you also can see some of the weight is spread out a little bit further down with all these connected domes. And they're there specifically to spread the weight out, like flying buttresses did in a lot of the architecture we see during the Renaissance. So you see a large central dome, other things around it. And we see in here is the Cesarii Mosque. What do you see that's similar to what we just saw?
Well, there's the big central dome in the background, and then you have all the littler ones connecting to it to kind of hold the structure together.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is you don't see those big pillars, and they're called piers. You don't see those big piers like here. And what that and instead they're replaced by a lot more of those clustered domes. So the weight, the huge weight in the center here, is being spread out even more than what was going on with the Holy Wisdom. What that meant was he could put in a lot more windows too, which I think is fascinating. But you see a lot of these soaring arches, and you see a lot of that, like the central dome, like what Jenny said, and then you see a lot more of these smaller things spreading out, and that's something that he keeps doing throughout all of his mosques that he built, and each succeeding mosque was bigger and better and brighter. But you see the inside here, because he's able to spread the weight of that central dome out with all those other little bubble domes around, he's able to put in a lot more windows, which lets in a lot more light. So you walk into a structure like this, and we're used to seeing, these ancient churches being all musty, dusty, and dark because the weight of the roof had to be supported with something, and usually it was a solid wall or solid piers. And here, because of Mimar Sinan's engineering excellence and training from all what everybody else did before him, you're able to get in a lot more light. And these things are astounding. But can you imagine walking into a place like this 600 years ago and seeing this? Now, this is a tomb. It's not a functioning mosque, but it is, and this is actually smaller than the Hagia Sophia. But the way that it's designed, you have all this light coming in, and I think it's astonishing. You see, they do a lot of stained glass too. The stained glass is quite a bit different than European stained glass. Stained glass is used. The stained glass style in Europe is called typology because they were showing images of saints that were types of what you should be like, and it's called typology. Here, there's a lot more of the geometric design. And then if there was anything representational, it was actually representational calligraphy. I love the fact that he's combined these beautiful Roman style spherical arches with that kind of 4-point arch. And you have this little peak right up there coming up. This seems to be a little bit more going back to the more blockiness of the Hagia Sophia. But it doesn't feel very, very blocky to me in the Hagia Sophia, but here it seems like it's intentional that it's supposed to look like this. I mean, these are just ridiculously tall, beautiful, and open structures with high ceilings. Now, if you can you imagine this row of windows here is called a clear story, and that's spelled Clerestory. A clear story is a row of windows whose primary function is to let in light. And it's really fascinating. I've seen some of these in person, and what's amazing to me is when you first come in and your eyes are adjusting to the light, this row of windows kind of blurs together, and it looks like the dome is resting on a ring of light. And it's absolutely amazing. One thing that's interesting about these lanterns is there's 5 general prayers in Islam throughout the day, start with dawn and ending at dusk. But there's also a couple others for when you need to show extra devotion or show that your heart's really in it when you're praying for somebody. And they happen before dawn and after dusk. So these need to be lit. And what's fascinating about these lanterns that I don't have any close-up images, these are basically glass chimneys that have like an oil lamp inside of them. But the outside of the glass is etched with verses from the Quran, and then they're rubbed with soot or painted. And so when the light is inside, it casts letters on the walls and the ceiling and the floor all around. And so when you go in to worship in the evening with these lanterns going on, you're surrounded by that word of God from the scriptures, which I just think that's an incredibly cool idea. What are some of the things that you see in this mosque that we're seeing? What are some of the architectural clues that tie it into this genre of architecture? What I'm seeing is that big central dome, like what Jenny pointed out, and these other domes that are there. But what is interesting to me is you have these big facades that have a lot of windows in them. They look like they're there to kind of retain the weight a little bit, which I think is really interesting. So I wonder if this is meant to be less of a mosque and more as a redoubt or a fort or something, or if it's meant to bring those kinds of images to mind. I don't know. But some of these are just absolutely astounding. The moral of the story is that Mimar Sinan is absolutely amazing because using his practical engineering expertise, he was able to build on the largest and most beautiful building in the world at the time and make things even more amazing. And his impact is still being felt centuries later. Oh, as a complete and total aside, anybody want to guess on who the most popular poet in North America is?
Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi.
It's actually that's really a good guess. The latest article that I read, it's Rumi, another Turkish poet. But those guys they remain among the most popular poets in the English-speaking world, which I think is funny. So we've got architecture that resonates around the world, and we've got poetry. Oh, and I think I lost something. Hold on a second. Sigh. Okay, I canceled out a page. I did not mean to. Okay, here we are. Oh, aggravation. Oh, this is so weird. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't have a 12-year-old that will help me on my computer. So I'll do the best I can. Now, I really love this image from the Topkapi Palace because this really kind of illustrates a lot of that cross-pollination. And as we look at this, I'll point out some of the things. Here's rugs and other textiles and all sorts of different kinds of designs. Looking at this, what kinds of cultures do you think of? Like in this area, I'm thinking Renaissance right through. This is what I think of as the Renaissance, because you see a lot of decoration in paintings and on walls that are like this. And I think that both cultures fed off each other. These rows make me think of things like Greece and Egypt. These kinds of scallops, again from North Africa. This is very much from something like the Dome of the Rock and around the Arabian Gulf. And a lot of that stuff is things that these artists did first, and then the Renaissance artists picked up on, or the Renaissance people did first, and these artists came back from Italy and said, hey, I got something great to show you. But I love this because it shows a lot of different ideas mixing together. One of the things that, like if we look right here, I'll blow this up a little bit. This flower right here, can you guys see where my mouse is? Can anybody? I'm sorry. You'll have to say something because when I'm sharing the screen, I can't see you. Can you guys see?
We lost it for a moment.
Okay, but now you can see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's fascinating to me is like these clouds are Ming Dynasty Chinese. Okay. This is a lotus. It's used in Christian and Muslim imagery, and it's also very Buddhist. Then you get these. This is a acanthus leaf, and this is from the Arabian Peninsula. And that's just one example. And then you get these floral displays, and I don't know what all the flowers mean, but they come from that florography that was developed during the Ottomans. And you come down here and you see these scallop structures, like particularly right here. This is a very European type of thing. The scallop shell was used to mark pilgrim trails all through Europe. It's a very Catholic, it's a very Christian type of thing. It denotes the passage of a pilgrim and devotion to the faith. And, so they're using all these kinds of things. And I can see here this is a very Roman style urn, the classical the re-envisioned classical Roman style stuff that was very popular in Europe. And you get these kind of, this is a Canthian style curlicue that's very Grecian. I just think that's absolutely fascinating. Then a very Roman style font right here. And then, this is something that comes from Southwest China. So there's a huge mix of stuff. And this is, some of this was restored and everything, but this is what the palace is, as close as they can get to what the palace looked like in the 16th century. And I think it's just absolutely fascinating that there's such a mix of different things that we can recognize. So I want you to look at these articles, peruse them and see the kind of fantastic architecture that they did. One of the things that Turkey is famous for is a town called Iznik. And Iznik has been at the forefront of ceramic engineering since the 12th century. They did absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, wonderful stuff. And here, look at this leaf is an acanthus leaf, and these are variations on the lotus. And you get a lot of these other kind of stylized flowers, each of them mean a different thing. One of the things that you'll see in a lot of early Europeans, not early, but like Renaissance era Baroque era European art is this 5-petaled rose motif, and you see that a lot in Islamic work as well. The 5 petals represent wisdom. They are in a lot of Christian art. It's wisdom that comes through the Holy Spirit, divine wisdom, and some of that is also true for Islamic art. But you'll see the 5-petal motif. I just think it's really fascinating, seeing this. This is centuries old, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And they would mass produce these tiles. And I want you to look at a lot of these, or I want you to look at these videos as well and just kind of follow them through. But the Ottoman era ceramics are amazing. And one of the reasons I think for this, and the reason why there is so much color and there's so much technological advancement in the realm of ceramics, is because it was important in this culture to cross-pollinate ideas. And it was not unusual for a Muslim doctor who had been trained by Muslim alchemists who had learned their skills from Taoist alchemists who were also familiar with acupuncture and were very interested with herbs from the time that they had spent learning in Ethiopia, and were absolutely appalled by the bloodletting that was now popular in Europe, because that was not the way to go. I mean, at this time, doctors were aware of the effects of things like, even though they could not see bacterium, they're very aware of what was going on with infections and things like this. They were trading knowledge back and forth. They were talking among each other. Really, really brilliant people. And I think a lot of that has to do with the sacredness of the idea of the transmission of knowledge through the metaphor of the book. The book was very important. Do any of you remember the kind of level of literacy in the Muslim world at this time? Do you remember?
I remember it's a lot higher than Europe. I don't remember the number though.
Yeah, it was a lot higher than Europe.
It was like 80, 90%.
Yeah. In the Quran, there are several passages that state you must have the Quran written in your heart. And what that meant is, for a lot of governments, is that wealthy people would set up schools in their own name, to train little boys and girls to learn how to read and write. And so you get a massive amount of literacy throughout a lot of these areas. And I think it's amazing. But I'm sorry, I was kind of sidetracked a little bit. But looking at this, we can see, there's the acanthus leaves. One of the I mentioned the acanthus leaves. I talked about how that they're important. Does anybody know what the acanthus leaves symbolize? And this is true in the Islamic art that we're seeing, but it's also true in like a lot of the hand carving and painting that we see in Europe, and the paintings that we see during the Renaissance in Europe. Anybody want to know what the acanthus leaf represents? The Corinthian style column you recognize that because it has acanthus leaves growing everywhere. In Islam, they became important as a symbol for a couple reasons. And the main one is that the Arabian Peninsula doesn't have any natural bodies of water that will remain wet during the entire year. There's none. There's lots of springs and alcoves, caves that have springs inside them and stuff like that, but there's no bodies of water that will remain all year round. And the acanthus plant, it grows in a lot of areas in Eastern Mediterranean, and then around through all the way over to the Arabian Sea. The acanthus plant will grow anywhere from 2 to 8 feet above a source of water. So if you are marching through the desert with no bodies of water that remain year round, and you see an acanthus plant, what does that tell you?
There's water there.
Yeah, there's water there and you're going to survive. And when the Prophet Muhammad came on the scene, the acanthus plant was already revered by a lot of people, but it became a symbol for things like benevolence and divine mercy. And so when we see acanthus plants like this, they become motifs that just are nice things to put into a home because it invites benevolence in. It reminds people to behave themselves. It reminds people to be nice to each other, you know, and say your prayers, all that kind of stuff. It becomes a very popular motif very quickly. And do you guys remember what this flower is?
Is that the lotus?
Yes, it's the lotus. And it's interesting because the way that the lotus is portrayed stylistically in Persia, it becomes like this. But before Islamic influence, the Persian lotus looked very much like the Chinese lotus, which is, you know, or the Indian lotus, which we see in like a lot of the yoga studios and stuff like that. And then when we start with the influence of uh, Islam, stylistic influence of Islam, we start seeing a really fascinating take on it, which it looks to me like it's kind of fusing that motif from the acanthus leaf with that kind of Indian style sideways lotus motif. I don't know if that's what I don't know what the word etymology of it is, but it is interesting to me. Some of the other stuff we want to look at is textile designs. Textiles were huge in Transoxiana. That was one of the things, and I don't know exactly why, but it wouldn't surprise me if it had a lot to do with the silk trade and where silkworms were, because you get a lot of the silkworms in I believe India and Western China, and a lot of these amazing rug designs come out from India and Iran, you know, and Persia. I just think that that's really interesting. But the carpets, what is so fascinating to me about carpets is that they represent a portable symbol of wealth or a portable storage of wealth. Because the carpets are worth quite a bit. They're practical. You use them as sleeping bags. You use them at the base of a tent to make the tent a lot more comfortable. When they get into areas that are cold, the carpets are often hung on the walls to display as well as to insulate. When they make their way, after people start returning to Europe from the Crusades, they've interacted with these magical carpets and they brought them home with them. Then you see like a portrait of the Arnolfini wedding or the Arnolfini couple. You see carpets on one of the tables. People would display carpets on tables rather than putting them on the floor. They were still putting weeds and rushes on the floors to soak up smell and soak up all the sheep crap. But people would put the carpets on the walls to insulate or store them on tabletops because they would be kept clean that way, which I just think that that's interesting. But we see a lot of the similar motifs in the carpets as we did in the tiles. And I want to share this with you. This just shows a lot of these Ottoman era carpets. And it's interesting to me, you see some motifs that are repeating. Like one of the things is colors. What's the color that seems to be really popular?
Red.
Red, yeah. And it's interesting to me for a couple reasons. And then you also, like in this one, you also see blue and green showing up. Red and purple in Hebrew iconography, it's the color of sacrifice. In Christian iconography, it's the color of um, the Christ, which, and both of those reference blood. And in Islam, it's also referencing blood in a little bit different way. It also symbolizes sacrifice and commitment to faith, but it's not what you think. You guys have heard the word jihad. Jihad is, is interpreted as holy war. When the Prophet was alive, he made it very clear that there was a greater and a lesser jihad. The lesser jihad was resorting to violence to protect women and children and your rights of freedom and worship when every other path fails. And so it's violence is the last resort, as Isaac Asimov said, of the enable. The people can't do anything better. The greater jihad is actually the struggle that you go through to make yourself a better person. And the ideal death, martyr death, is actually to die when you're in your 80s of old age because you've given your whole life in benefit to community and your children. That's what the Quran talks about, and that's what the Prophet talks about. Have any of you heard that interpretation of jihad? It's a really rare perspective. And so red is also a very expensive color. It's a color that's reserved for the wealthiest. And so that's why Jesus is depicted as being in a red or purple robe. That's why kings wear red or purple. But and so this interpretation that red is the color of sacrifice, I think holds true in Islam as well, but it's a reminder that the sacrifice is a personal one. And I think that's really interesting. But I believe that one of the reasons why red was such a popular color for the carpets is that it is an expensive dye, a very expensive dye. And some of these are close-ups of the same carpet, so it's not every carpet in their collection is red, but it is interesting that there is so much red on display. And then the last thing I want to talk about is calligraphy and the book arts. But I also have to get in stained glass. This is what Turkish stained glass looks like. I think it's absolutely astonishing. Anyway, as you look at the calligraphy, do you guys remember from our discussion last week why calligraphy is such an important element of art for areas in the Islamic world or the Muslim world? Do you guys remember why I think that human portraiture is so important in the Renaissance and the Western world, or the Christian world? I think a big part of it has to deal with the idea, and there were even writers in the Renaissance that talked about this, quoting from Psalms, "What is man that thou art mindful of him, and the Son of Man that thou visitest him?" This is one of the primary reasons why Renaissance painters used the human form. And Son of Man is one of the names given to the body of Christ. And in the book of John, in 1 John, I think it was, talks about the Word of God was made flesh and dwelt among us, in reference to the logos or measure of the universe being given human form as a body. And I think that ties in quite a bit. Those two things tie in quite a bit as to why the human form is so prevalent in Renaissance art and throughout Western, or the Christian-driven Western world. In Islam, the word, instead of being made into a human body, the word was actually given by an angel to the Prophet Muhammad and written down. The Prophet Muhammad never learned to read or write himself. Did anybody else know that? He never learned to read or write. His wife, though, Khadija, did. She was fluent in a half a dozen languages and could read and write in all of them. So she was the first scribe of the Quran. And so the Prophet Muhammad would be asked told to memorize things by the angel Gabriel, come down, recite that to his wife. She would write it down, and that's how the Quran was written. And so in the Western culture, the body represents that logos, or the governance of the universe by God. And in the Muslim world, the written word does. And so I think that's why calligraphy is considered the highest of the art forms. And so you get these amazing things. This is actually by Solomon the Magnificent, one of the emperors of Ottoman Turkey. This is his signature. And calligraphy was such a huge deal that they thought, okay, the perfect line is too simple. Perfect brushstrokes are too simple. So we're going to find mulberry leaves. We're going to dry them, and we're going to pop out the little dry areas between the veins, and we're going to make calligraphy that way. And there's a whole practice of calligraphy where they would do that, calligraphy on dried leaves. They punch out the parts that they didn't want, that the calligraphy wasn't supposed to be there, and then they would gold leaf it, just because anything else would be too simple. I think that's ridiculous. That's astonishing and amazing. One of the calligraphers that I spoke with said that when they take it really seriously, the calligraphy. And a calligrapher will breathe out with every stroke of their brush or their pen, because that breath represents life going into the writing. It's their soul going in and giving life to the writing. I just think it's amazing. But the calligraphy where you're actually punching out, not punching out, where you're generating almost images, it's called tugra. And that's where these the emperors would learn to write their name in such a way that they could make animals with them. Or they would do poetry where the poetry would start looking like a form. Now, this person isn't taking tugra to that, in this demonstration, isn't taking tugra to that effect, but he's writing the calligraphy so that they look like forms, almost like budding flowers or different things. They're different styles meant different things. In some styles, it was designed so that all the Arabic would look like people praying. In other styles, it's designed to look like blocks or bricks to remind you that your job is to help build the kingdom of heaven on earth. With your family, you build a better place for everyone. And it's just really interesting how seriously people took calligraphy. And we're not going to watch this, but I want you to watch it, but I want to show you this signature. I'm trying to, there we go. Maybe? Okay, here we go. Arabic is a language that when you read it, you can read the whole thing at once. You can read it forwards and backwards. And what that means is calligraphers have a lot of free reign to write things the way that they want to. And generally you read it from right to left, but if you're signing your name, you can make the letters as big and little as you want. You can put them in different sequences. You can do all sorts of stuff. And if people know it's your signature, they can still read it as your signature. This is really interesting to me because this guy has even done like little acanthus leaves and little 5-petaled flowers inside of this. He's done gold leafing. And, this is done by an emperor. This is his signature. And he did the gold leafing himself. He knew how to do all this himself. I think it's absolutely amazing. And this is an ink. The lapis ink is incredibly expensive as well. It's expensive, and lapis is expensive enough that in the Renaissance, when people commissioned paintings that had blue in them, the person who commissioned the painting would stipulate exactly the percentage of lapis that he needed in that blue paint to make sure that he was getting what he was paying for. So, rather expensive ink. And then, of course, the gold. But I just think that's really fascinating. So definitely watch this video. It's about 2.5 minutes, and it walks through and talks about just the process of calligraphy. There were other things that are really amazing too. And I mentioned Ebru and Vitre. I've taught classes on both of these, but Ebru is Turkish water marbling. And you guys, it's really fun. You can actually buy a kit for less than $20 off of Amazon if you're interested in doing this, and just watch some of the professionals who do Ebru, and follow along if you can and make something. That would be a really worthwhile project. But this started becoming, you start seeing echoes of this in those Name things that we see in the Mughals were paying for. But by the time this got to Ottoman Turkey, these guys were doing just astounding things. And then the Italians got into it and just fell in love with it too. This is paint that has to be a specific weight, a specific density. It has a very specific surface tension to the paint. It's put onto a slightly gelled water medium, so that the paint will stay on the surface. And then the artist knows how the paint's going to react. Different paints will, if you dot them on top of each other, they will spread across the water in different ways. And then the artist will also use combs in different ways. So the artist has to know what the specific densities of all the fluids that they're using are, and what the different styles of combs will do. The first time I encountered somebody in a class with this was a really lovely lady that had 4 little kids that were running around. And she was doing a demonstration on this. And I started asking her about it. And she was giving me, the normal answers you give when somebody's asking vapid questions. And then I started getting into more specifics. And the lady just launched off. Turns out that her advanced degrees were from the University of Istanbul. And her degrees were in hydrodynamics, fluid dynamics. Her PhD was in applying Newtonian motion laws to specific densities of fluids in different types of media. And she said the reason why she got into Ebru was because she felt it was beautiful that she could apply those rules of hydrodynamics to art, and she fell in love with it. I think it's just amazing, absolutely amazing. So there, a couple of I have a video that you guys can watch, but again, I don't think I'll. Oh, let's see. We'll get past this ad. Okay, this is only 3 minutes. Let's watch this. I don't know if it'll be edited out of the final thing, but I think it would be beneficial anyway, because this is something that. How many of you have seen Turkish water marbling? Okay, one person. Okay, let me go ahead, if you don't mind, Ryan. I'm just going to go ahead and show this.
Ebru'nun en kısa anlamı için su yüzeyi sanatı diyebiliriz.
Okay, sorry, I forgot. This is in Turkish, so I'm just going to turn that off. But then we have the English subtitles. But watch what this person is doing. They have different combs. They can draw pictures. All of this is incredibly fluid paint that is on the surface of water that is slightly gelled. I'm sorry that the sound is not very good. I'm sorry, without the sound, it's going to be awful boring, but I don't want you guys being confused. I would definitely watch this on your own and see what this person does. But this started with the Name tradition, and then when it got to Turkey, I think you see kind of an influence of the Renaissance as well in here, because people are really fascinated with the engineering behind it, and that's one of the reasons why these things are so amazing. So again, it's made by putting fluid paint on the surface of a slightly gelled water, and then paper is very carefully put on it, and then the dyes and paint transfer to the paper as you carefully pull it off. And there are absolutely astounding things that people do. But this artist is pretty remarkable, and he even, who can name what this painting is from? That's Alphonse Munk's the Scream. And so this guy does some pretty remarkable stuff. Anyway, and then we get, and there's an article about it. Again, it's an awful lot of fun. And then this is vitre, or it's Turkish stained glass. Some of the things that you can see right away, this is very specifically different from stained glass from Europe or around that we see in cathedrals. You don't see any human forms. Instead of human forms, we do have recognizable graphic elements that are calligraphy coming from the Quran, and then we have plant forms. And we have stylized plant forms that you see echoes of in a lot of the other Turkish stuff, like the carpets that we saw and things like that. And a lot of these petals are going to be 5, 6, and 8 petals. Each of those have very specific meaning for the number behind them. But I think that it's really very interesting. And then this, I wanted to share this with you really quick because I thought it was kind of fun. But it's another project that if you guys are interested, you can do it. It is, you can buy a kit to make them yourself off of Amazon for about $65, I think, if you guys are interested. And what this is just showing some of these this Turkish style mosaic lamp, which vitre basically means colored light. And this particular way is not the stained glass like that was in that other window. This is a stained glass that you generate by gluing. So this is a mosaic process that's similar to Roman mosaics. And with the difference being that you glue these colored pieces of glass that are already cut onto a clear vessel that will be used as the lamp. So I'm not showing you the whole video. I just want to show you snippets of it so you can kind of see how they develop. And then this stuff is a grout that you put onto the glass. You clean it off of everywhere where the colored glass is and leave it in place in all the cracks. And then that's what makes it so that the design comes out with the light. I didn't dwell on these an awful lot because there aren't an awful lot of identifiable masters in these media. Um, they become almost like a ubiquitous fixture. But the stained glass itself, and like Mimar Sinan, he did design stained glass for a lot of his things. One of the reasons why I think he's amazing is that his own residence, uh, he designed this really nice big bathroom for himself with stained glass windows in it that he could ponder while he was sitting down. And he had a little library in it. And I thought that demonstrates a certain sense of practical humor. But are there any of the things that we looked at from this area that struck you guys?
I was well aware that that area is a crossroads, but to see European and Chinese influence on the same piece at that crossroads, that was pretty cool.
Well, yeah, when we think of a crossroads, we're thinking of, okay, there's going to be the bazaar. That makes total sense. But to see that evidence in the art, yeah, I think that is really very cool. And then if we go back to Europe, at this same time period, we start to see some of the influence from Egypt and China showing up in that work as well, which is really amazing. Like Rembrandt, that's when he came across those Chardonnay pages, and it influenced a lot of his painting in later life. But yeah, I love seeing evidence of that cross pollination. Anything else?
One that struck me was the calligraphy and how painstakingly processed it was to do like a page. So I couldn't imagine doing like the whole book of the Quran like that. That'd be took so long to do.
No, and you're right. It is amazing. And the Quran, the more influence that Islam held, people started doing Qurans, and there were illustrated Qurans in the beginning, but as the uh, different schools took ascendance, that kind of went out of style. But by this time in bookbinding, you would get Qurans they would be special dyes. There would be calligraphy that was made with an outline with human hair, and just astonishingly massive amounts of energy being put into making a beautiful object. Well, yeah, you're right. It was just I can't believe that people would do it, but the artists that were involved, they may have a team of 20 or 30 students that were working with them that they would watch over. And it may take them a year or two to make a book, but that one book would feed, clothe, and house everybody in the families of all 30 people. And that's which I think is just astounding. But as soon as that book came out and people saw it, the guy would get 20 more orders and say, okay, all these people would know that they'd be fed for the next 30 years. I think stuff like that is pretty incredible. But yeah, it's just amazing. Anything else? Any other observations?
I thought the Hebrew art was cool. It reminded me of the poor art, the style of it. It looks really, really similar to it.
Which art?
The Hebrew art, the one where there's like paint over water, like it reminds me of poor art.
Oh, poor art. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It's really interesting. I wonder how much poor art is influenced by what the Ebru guys were doing. But that's on Amazon, and I think I saw it at Walmart too. You can get an Ebru kit if you're interested, and do that. I love doing it. I think it's an awful lot of fun because it forces you to think very differently. It's not like regular painting at all. All right. Any other last observations?
The intricateness of the stained glass windows was very mesmerizing to me. I've actually worked with glass, and it's kind of a bear to work with. So to see the detail and that they were able to put the calligraphy into the glass. That was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to share this page again really quick. What is incredible to me is you can see the sections of different glass that they put together. But what's amazing to me is how this reads almost like lace with all this stuff going on, like the background. You know, since time period in the West, if the background was blue, it would be a chunk of blue glass as as big as they needed, and maybe painted a little bit. But in this, that blue field is made up with all these little shapes coming together, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. I'll try to dig out a picture of a stained glass window that I saw in Isfahan, that all the pieces were the size of a pencil eraser. It just mind blowing. It bothers me because I've been doing glass for 40 years, but that gives me massive headaches thinking about that. I don't want to do it. But yeah, I before we go, there was a couple of things that I wanted to mention, and one is I really love the diversity of projects that people are doing. I love that, and I want to remind you that if things are done so that if you don't get a perfect score because I say something like citations are off or it's in the wrong file format or whatever like that, as soon as you fix it, let me know and I'll go back and change the grade. And I have no problem doing that because I want you guys to get the best grade you can. And most of the time, the reason why the project it doesn't have a perfect score is because of little piddly things like that. One thing that I noticed too is that it's rare that I see somebody who does a project that's not within the scope of the class, and I really appreciate you guys looking at the module headings and just letting yourself go. I think it's really fun to see that diversity. Another thing I wanted to mention is that as I go through and do grade things, like if after it's due, then I will start putting in zeros. But what that means is I do that intentionally because then it triggers Canvas to send you a notice to remind you to turn that in. Because you guys are taking an online course because you're busy and you're going to forget to turn stuff in. So the zero doesn't mean that you're an utter failure as a human being most of the time. What it does mean is that you just forgot to turn that in. So please don't take that as a failure. When you turn it in, then the system pings me and I know to go back and give you an updated grade. All right. And again, how many times can you resubmit stuff? Do you guys remember?
As many times as you want.
As many times as you need to until you get the score that you're happy with. Yes, absolutely. And I am more than happy to go back and rescore whatever we get. All right, well, that's what I've got for today. Are there any last questions from anybody? All right, that means everybody knows everything and we can just wrap up the class. Good for you. But thank you so much for joining me this week. For people that are here live, especially, and for people as you watch it recording later. Or I know that America, she loves these and she watches the recordings at least 3 times during the week. But for everybody else, one is plenty. So, but thank you very much. I hope you guys have a great week and a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.